like yesterday now when you go work.
Hi, Peggy. Happy weekend to everyone. Guys, you are highly welcome today again. Guys, you are welcome. Please, as you come in, can we like? Thank you for joining. I know most of you, yeah, must have been waiting for me. Yeah, I was away for some time. Yeah, just to do some stuff, and I'm back now. How is how is your weekend going? I love your hair. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, guys. Good morning. Happy weekend. Please, if you're just joining, can we go like and subscribe? And if you've done that, just put down your name. I'll give you a shout out. I'll start from the top, sure. And the first person on my list here is, she was the first person to come. She is Adriana.
Yes, Sophie, I'm doing.
You're beautiful. Thank you so much. So, where is Sophia? I've been missing Sophia. She always be the first person to come. I'm not seeing Sophia for some days now. Yeah, please drop your name. I give you a shout out. We are here again this beautiful Saturday morning because it's morning here. So, guys, let's go like and subscribe. A big shout out to Adriana. A big shout out to Gil. A big shout out to Sylvia. A big shout out to Eliana. You are all welcome. Then I will pick your names randomly now. Nice to meet you, Ruben. Guys, as we come in, please let's like and sub. A big shout out to Lara. A big shout out to Akiwa. A big shout out to Tony. A big shout out to Cherry. A big shout out to Dorsey. Thank you so much. A big shout out to Ola. A big shout out to Luna. A big shout out to Sulaiman. A big shout out to Wisnia. A big shout out to Felix. Hi. A big shout out to Luna. Luna Ray. Guys, let's go like and subscribe. A big shout out to Zano. A big shout out to Willows. Shout out to Sam Sia. First birthday on. Okay, guys, I forgot to say today is my son's birthday. Yeah, he turned 11 today. So let me sing for him because I've been singing for everyone. He's not here right now. But yeah, I want to sing it on behalf. If today is your birthday, drop your name so that I will add everyone together. You know, I always sing on this live. Happy birthday. So drop your name and say today is my birthday so that I will merge you all and sing for you all. Okay? You see, everyone is saying today is my birthday, today is my birthday. How will I sing for 19 person? 19, like someone said tomorrow, oh, yours is fair. But I've seen like 10 person saying today is my birthday. How will I call the names? Please, let's don't lie now. Please now. I'm not joking. We shouldn't lie. It's not fair. It's not fair on those that are really, really celebrating their birthday. It's not fair on them. Please, no cheating. Can we please be truthful for once? Please, let's be truthful. It's not fair on those that really have the birthday today, like my son. My birthday is tomorrow. Oh, that's fine. That's fine. Please put down your name. Let's sing. Then we start with the shout out, okay? Put down your name. Yeah. No one. Today's my birthday. What's your name? Mana. Mana. Here's a pen. Yeah. Okay. I'll just sing it. Yeah, just like that. I'll just call my son's name and I'll say and others. That will be fine, okay? A big shout out to my son Gerard. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Gerard, and everyone that is celebrating today. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, everyone that is celebrating today with my son. He just turned 11. Happy birthday, and I wish you good luck and all the best of life. Thank you. So drop your names now. Let's give you a shout out. Everyone drop your names. Thank you. Thank you. A big shout out to, I just turned 8. Oh, congratulations. A big shout out to Dahilia. Shout out to Hami. Shout out to Maho. Shout out to Zaid King. Shout out to Annabelle. Shout out to Neela. Shout out to Well Not. Shout out to Silas. Shout out to Lola. Shout out to Natalie. A big shout out to C. Please, if you're having your birthday very soon, don't miss this live stream because I will definitely sing for you when you come. Someone just said tomorrow is her birthday, so you are booked already. You are booked for tomorrow's singing. Yeah, I'll sing for you, okay? Just come tomorrow. A big shout out to Eddie. Oh, thank you so much for subbing. A big shout out to Rita. A big shout out to Ewa. Shout out to Pipa. Shout out to Jana. Shout out to Sandy. Yeah, I was here yesterday. Oh, thank you so much. Shout out to Adaline. Shout out to Rose. Guys, can we take the like up to 20? Yeah, let's take the like up to 20 and please subscribe. Thank you so much. Have a blessed day. God bless you. A big shout out to Molly. A big shout out to Salma. A big shout out to Suchi. A big shout out to Ellie. A big shout out to Ella. A big shout out to Edward. A big shout out to Bog. A big shout out to Nadia. Guys, I just need your name. If you have any question, we'll wait at the almost the end of the live. Don't worry, I'll answer your questions, but not now. Yeah, we are just giving shout out now, but almost at the end of the live stream, yeah, I will answer your questions. Okay, so you don't say I'm ignoring your questions, please. Just your names. Just your names. Okay, let's go. A big shout out to Salsa. A big shout out to Layla. Shout out to Vero. Shout out to Mangi. A big shout out to Maquitri. A big shout out to Sabine. A big shout out to Olivia. Shout out to Anaya. Can I see your nails? A big shout out to Naomi. A big shout out to Savannah. A big shout out to Marisha. A big shout out to Suleiman. A big shout out to Kobe. Shout out to Keira. Shout out to Brainley. Shout out to Luna Ray. Shout out to Rayleigh. Shout out to Madi. Shout out to Susu. Shout out to Danny. Shout out to What? Shout out to Kara. Shout out to Annabelle Young. Shout out to Wayna. Shout out to Alessio. Shout out to Kaka. Shout out to Adaline. Shout out to Marquita. Shout out to Afa. Guys, please let's go like and subscribe. Thank you so much as you come in. Drop your name after you've liked and you have subscribed. Thank you so much. A big shout out to Sophia. A big shout out to Dua. A big shout out to Kaka. Shout out to James. Shout out to Aisha. Shout out to Safa. Shout out to Zainab. Shout out to Kara. Shout out to Unkateko. Shout out to Minnie May. Shout out to David. Shout out to Kennedy. Shout out to Luna. Shout out to Luciana. Shout out to David. A big shout out to Sarah. Shout out to Bolu. Shout out to Elise. You're welcome, darling. A big shout out to Imara. A big shout out to Donna. A big shout out to Malice. Shout out to Malika. Shout out to Montana. Shout out to Marina. A big shout out to Wayna. A big shout out to Lilian. A big shout out to Kiara. A big shout out to Anna. A big shout out to Dee. A big shout out to Roadblocks. Roadblocks. Is that your name? A big shout out to Kiki. That's it, girl. That's it. Thank you so much. A big shout out to Reina. A big shout out to you're welcome, my darling. A big shout out to Unkateko. A big shout out to JC. A big shout out to Andrew. Shout out to Tian. Shout out to Drake. Shout out to Brikenna. Shout out to Cupid. Shout out to you are so good. Thank you so much. A big shout out to Maddie. Shout out to Carissa. Shout out to Kingsley. Shout out to Mike Coach. Shout out to Misu. A big shout out to Ami. A big shout out to Jasmine. A big shout out to What? A big shout out to What? Yeah. Let's go, guys. Let's go. A big shout out to Anel. A big shout out to Madison. Let's go. A big shout out to Telt. A big shout out to Eva. A big shout out to Lisa. Shout out to Leon. Shout out to Shams. Shout out to Shelby. Shout out to Lila. Shout out to Kim. A big shout out to Ella. A big shout out to Anton. Let's go. Drop your names. A big shout out to Alasia. A big shout out to Drizzy Drake. A big shout out to Cupcake. A big shout out to Tori. Probably you love Cupcake. Guys, let's go like and subscribe. Can we take the like up to 50? Thank you so much. A big shout out to Kobe. A big shout out to Abiba. A big shout out to Sophia. Shout out to Hapa. Shout out to Hartley. Let's go. Shout out to Ariana. Shout out to Brainley. Shout out to Zara. Shout out to Izuku. Midoriya. A big shout out to Ima. A big shout out to Astrid. A big shout out to Amara. Shout out to Misu. Shout out to JJ Juju 34. A big shout out to Hayden. A big shout out to Leah. A big shout out to Samavia. Shout out to Charlotte. Shout out to Sarah. Shout out to Chilo. Shout out to Lauren. Shout out to Eniola. Shout out to Camilla. Guys, let's go like and sub. Can we take the like up to 60? Let's go. Barrelino Cappuccino. A big shout out to Lizzie. A big shout out to Presley. A big shout out to Blake. Shout out to Jason. A big shout out to Kayla. A big shout out to Dan. A big shout out to Leah. A big shout out to Ella. A big shout out to Lane. A big shout out to Nova. Shout out to Octavia. I saw you yesterday. Shout out to Roma. Shout out to Mungai. Shout out to Junior. Shout out to Tung 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 Sahura. Oh my days. I can't believe I saw that. I didn't, yeah, I saw it. Somebody put it down. So, sorry, not my fault. A big shout out to Tawheed. A big shout out to Naro. A big shout out to Michaela. A big shout out to Lana. A big shout out to Gillian. A big shout out to Jasmine. Shout out to Lena. Shout out to Nero. Shout out to Lit Boho. Shout out to Rainy. Let's go. Drop your names. Can we take the like up to 70, guys? Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Please take the like up to 70 and don't forget to subscribe. A big shout out to London. A big shout out to Emily. Shout out to Bella. Shout out to Awa. Shout out to Kamara. Shout out to Angela. Shout out to Natalie. Shout out to ASR Ide. Shout out to Luna. Shout out to yes. Me. Oh, sorry. Shout out to Millie. Big shout out to Molly. Shout out to shout out to Cadence. Shout out to Sherry. Shout out to Alia. Shout out to Mia. A big shout out to Andrew. Big shout out to Megan. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you for liking and subscribing. Thank you so much. A big shout out to a big shout out to Jasmine. A big shout out to Essie. A big shout out to Bethany. A big shout out to Akira. A big shout out to Tracy. A big shout out to Bethany. A big shout out to Serafina. A big shout out to Margaret. A big shout out to Maxwell. I love you so much. A big shout out. I love you too, my darling. I love you so much. A big shout out to Holly. A big shout out to Alania. A big shout out to Sony. A big shout out to Easy. Shout out to Noah. A big shout out to Ariana. Shout out to Cruz. A big shout out to Kendra. A big shout out to Max. A big shout out to Makia. I love you too. Thank you. A big shout out to Kayla. A big shout out to Alana. A big shout out to Abel. Please let's go like and subscribe. Thank you for spamming. Thank you so much. God bless those ends. Those your fingers is blessed. Let's go. A big shout out to Alana. A big shout out to Haley. A big shout out to Gigi. A big shout out to Olivia. Shout out to Mazia. Shout out to Rohim. A big shout out to Kama. A big shout out to Heavy. A big shout out to Alana. Shout out to Jelly. A big shout out to Osha. Thank you so much. A big shout out to Jane Sean, Dimitri, Flavius. That's somebody's name. Mighty name. A big shout out to Raimi. A big shout out to Ami. A big shout out to Halia. A big shout out to Kiki. Maya. A big shout out to Maya. A big shout out to Job C. Shout out to Sino. Shout out to Rami. A big shout out to Otto. A big shout out to Lola. A big shout out to Nina. A big shout out to Abel. Shout out to Shankui. Shout out to Asa. A big shout out to Salsabila Azara. That's someone's name. A big shout out to Landon. Shout out to Seren. Shout out to Helly. Shout out to Aja. Shout out to Asa. Shout out to Mila. Shout out to Talia. A big shout out to Kata. Shout out to Gabrielle. A big shout out to Anika. Thank you for subbing, my darling. A big shout out to Kena. Thank you. A big shout out to Kiki Hair and Lifestyle. That's me. That's me. That's me. Thank you so much for that. A big shout out to Lassie. A big shout out to Soler. A big shout out to Felicity. You're a diva as well, okay? Thank you so much. A big shout out to Ava. A big shout out to Taylor, my diva. A big shout out to Marawan. A big shout out to Maya. Shout out to Sophia. Shout out to Mais. Shout out to Eri. A big shout out to Serebugi. My bestie. Thank you so much. A big shout out to Maria. Shout out to Zaylee. Shout out to Letro. Shout out to Felicity. Shout out to Sona. Shout out to Alia. I love you too. Thank you so much. Shout out to Nelly. Shout out to Sona. Shout out to Tilly. A big shout out to Yona. You can see love sign on my both shoulders. You can see heart on my both this thing. So thank you so much. I love you too. A big shout out to Abigail. Shout out to Zach. Oh, thank you. Shout out to Arie. Shout out to Rose Bogu. Shout out to Honey. Shout out to Felicity. Shout out to Emilia Rose. Shout out to Hannah B. Shout out to Dan Yee. Shout out to Tammy. Big shout out to Anna. Shout out to Yanis. Thank you so much. You're gorgeous as well. Yeah, everyone that I've said you're pretty, you're beautiful, you are pretty, you are also gorgeous. Looking, you're absolutely stunning, including your names. Your names are pretty, you know. I'm happy saying them, you know, saying it. Thank you so much. A big shout out to Rose, a big shout out to Paka, a big shout out to Calista Rose, a big shout out to Davies. A big shout out to Felicity. A big shout out to Calista. A big shout out to Mia and Nia. Are you both twin? Oh, those names sound very close. A big shout out to Sienna. A big shout out to Metsi. Big shout out to Yaron. A big shout out to Pristine. Shout out to Sienna. Shout out to Alexi. Shout out to Maxine. A big shout out to Kaiten. A big shout out to Yulia. It's me. Yeah, I see you. And I remember you. Thank you so much. A big shout out to Lily. A big shout out to Elijah. A big shout out to Hedy. A big shout out to Millie. A big shout out to Nika Manala Siana Tirana. You guys don't let me bite my tongue. But anyways, that's a powerful name. All those long names, they are powerful. And I just feel happy calling those names, even if I'm not getting the pronunciation. A big shout out to Van Chinta. A big shout out to Ibella. I think those not long names, it just gives the vibes, you know. It gives that long vibes. Yeah, so I just love it. Why these short names just give me that calm, as in relax, take a deep breath, something like that. So it goes hand in hand, you know. A big shout out to E. Morgan. A big shout out to Jana. A big shout out to Sophie. A big shout out to Rainy. A big shout out to Mia. A big shout out to Sia Vatvika. A big shout out to George. A big shout out to Skylar. A big shout out to Kayla. A big shout out to Jeez. A big shout out to Samantha. A big shout out to Abby. Shout out to Copa. Shout out to Barney. Guys, can we take the like up to 90? Yeah, let's take the like up to 90. And please subscribe. I love you. A big shout out to Naomi. A big shout out to Jana. A big shout out to Kim. A big shout out to Maya. A big shout out to Siali. A big shout out to Kara. A big shout out to Cassie. A big shout out to Mike. A big shout out to Mike. Ooh, cheese, Harry. A big shout out to Alega. A big shout out to Aliza. A big shout out to Taylor. A big shout out to Mega. Let's go, guys. Let's go. Can we take the likes up to 100? And please subscribe. Thank you so much. Big shout out to Wendy. Let's go back to back. Shout out to Zoya. Shout out to Zuna. Shout out to Lee. Shout out to Emmy. Shout out to Francisca. Shout out to Aman. Shout out to Ollie. Shout out to Kaylee. Shout out to Mike. Shout out to Medina. A big shout out to Andra. A big shout out to Bobby. A big shout out to Sponge. A big shout out to Rosie. A big shout out to Ainara. A big shout out to Blessings. A big shout, I have to put S because I need to share your blessing as well. A big shout out to Cassie. A big shout out to Nicola. A big shout out to Autumn. Shout out to Daniela. A big shout out to May. A big shout out to Heart. A big shout out to Iluvia. A big shout out to Nana. A big shout out to Emily Mandicine. Shout out to Scarlett. Shout out to Maya. Shout out to Melissa. Guys, please let's take the like up to 100. Thank you so much. I love you all. And don't forget to subscribe. Let's go. A big shout out to epic shout out to Kiki. Thank you so much. That's me. That's me. That's me. That's me. Thank you so much. A big shout out to Gaio. A big shout out to Owen. A big shout out to Ere. A big shout out to Wema. A big shout out to Mills. You're welcome. A big shout out to Naomi. A big shout out to Harmony. You're my favorite live streamer. Thank you, my darling. A big shout out to Zanda. A big shout out to Saskia. A big shout out to Taylor. Am I muted? Oh no, a big shout out to Zoe. I'm sorry, I was muted. A big shout out to Nelly. Nelly, I know you. I saw you yesterday. Thank you so much for coming around again. Thank you so much. A big shout out to Polly. A big shout out to Amy. Guys, I'm so sorry I was muted. And I hope you can hear me now. Thank you so much. A big shout out to Jeremiah. A big shout out to Osim. A big shout out to Tanya. A big shout out to Sydney. A big shout out to Aria. Shout out to Evalina. Shout out to Ami. Shout out to Sadio. A big shout out to Felix. A big shout out to Crystal. A big shout out to Roga. A big shout out to Jamie. Please help me with that name. Jamie Kui. Gemique. What does it sound? A big Gemique. The Q is just trying to mess up with QU. Okay, I know that Q is okay. Okay, it's really messing around with my head. I've seen that name several times, and I'm not happy that I can't pronounce it. Please help me. I'm so sorry that I'm not pronouncing it right. Okay, a big shout out to Sonima. A big shout out to Heidi. Thank you so much for the 100 likes. Yay! I love you all. A big shout out to Nico. A big shout out to Indian. A big shout out to Viola. A big shout out to Rose. A big shout out to Taylor. Guys, please let's take the like up to 110. Thank you so much. A big shout out to Leah. Shout out to Hella. A big shout out to Max.
Oh, mute.
Yeah. A big shout out to Analia. A big shout out to Ella. A big shout out to Neela. A big shout out to Olivia. A big shout out to Veda. A big shout out to Honey. A big shout out to Elizabeth. A big shout out to Lana. A big shout out to Muri. A big shout out to Zarish. A big shout out to Autumn. A big shout out to London. If you know London, say hi. If you have been to London Bridge, say hi. I've been there severally, and it's a beautiful place. A big shout out to Fala because I live in the UK. Okay, so I've been there. A big shout out to Isabel. A big shout out to Jamaya. A big shout out to Lachlan. A big shout out to VFX7. A big shout out to Isabel Jessica. Shout out to Elliot. Shout out to Jemaya. Big shout out to Fene. A big shout out to Cassie. A big shout out to Gabriella. Shout out to Paisley. Shout out to Jake. Shout out to Janda. A big shout out to Anastasia. Big shout out to Tewo. Big shout out to Bella. Shout out to Anya. Shout out to Angela. Shout out to Cassie. Shout out to Lily. Shout out to Amelia. Hiya. Shout out to KK. Shout out to Addison. Shout out to Niga. Shout out to Bella. Shout out to Decent. Shout out to Hoodsin. Shout out to Ava. A big shout out to George. Shout out to Tess. Thank you so much. Shout out to Zara. Shout out to Zoja. Shout out to Tabi. Shout out to Pokis. Shout out to Alex. Shout out to Bay. Shout out to Christ. Shout out to Kush. Shout out to Jessica. Guys, please let's take the like up to 120. 120, and please like and subscribe. Thank you so much. Drop your names back to back. I'll give you a shout out. Okay. A big shout out to Lorish. A big shout out to Kayla. A big shout out to Regina. A big shout out to Lusa. A big shout out to Banas. A big shout out to Cynthia. A big shout out to Isa. A big shout out to Lauren. A big shout out to Aya. A big shout out to Shiloh. A big shout out to Kali. A big shout out to Ava. A big shout out to Naya. Shout out to Milo. Shout out to Opa Kiwi. A big shout out to Jemima. A big shout out to Nithima. A big shout out to Daggy. Let's go. Let's take the like up to 130. Yeah, let's take the like up to 130. And please, I'll not put this thing inside though. Please, let's take the like up to 130. And please, subscribe as well. Thank you so much. A big shout out to Foga. A big shout out to Fogat. A big shout out to Anastasia. A big shout out to Lila. A big shout out to Adeline. A big shout out to Rayleigh. Yeah, a big shout out to Jasmine. A big shout out to Sherry. A big shout out to Aliana. A big shout out to Teddy. A big shout out to Adeline. I love you too. Thank you so much. A big shout out to Zaya. Shout out to Isaac. A big shout out to Aisha. A big shout out to Ima. A big shout out to Pirana. A big shout out to Joel. A big shout out to Olivia. A big shout out to Victoria. I love your stream. Thank you so much. I love you too. A big shout out to Evelyn. Shout out to Ariane. Shout out to Anali. Shout out to Jade. Shout out to Honk. Shout out to Tatum. Shout out to Sadie. Shout out to Adisi. Shout out to Vivi. Shout out to Joes. Yeah, a big shout out to Tiara. A big shout out to Louis. Shout out to James. Shout out to Essa. Shout out to Offense. Shout out to Cassie. A big shout out to Emily G. Shout out to Daggy. Shout out to Fenja. Hope you've gotten a shout out now, Fenja. A big shout out to Mia. A big shout out to Mana. A big shout out to Elena. You're welcome. Shout out to Alice. Shout out to Mano. Shout out to Leslie. Shout out to Sylvia. Shout out to Sophie. Thank you so much. A big shout out to Johnny. Thank you for that comment. Someone said, be yourself. Absolutely. Thank you so much. A big shout out to Daniela. A big shout out to Adre. A big shout out to Imaira. Shout out to Mavi. Shout out to Lara. Shout out to Jasmine. Shout out to Cynthia.
Cynthia. No, Cynthia.
A big shout out to Emily. A big shout out to Rocco. A big shout out to Liara. Shout out to Nene. Shout out to Libby. A big shout out to Rejoice. I say rejoice, everyone. A big shout out to Amma. Shout out to Liba. Shout out to Abe. Shout out to Finley. Shout out to Aris. A big shout out to Kaylee. Shout out to Mima. A big shout out to Megan. A big shout out to Emmy. A big shout out to Audrey. A big shout out to Raiden. A big shout out to Leo. Let's go, guys. Let's take the like up to 140. Let's use 10 seconds to take the like to 40 and subscribe. Thank you so much. You love my nails. Thank you so much. Thank you. Please, let's go like and subscribe back to back. No one is tapping for me again. No more spamming. Yeah, let's do it now. A big shout out to Cassie. A big shout out to Yonche. A big shout out to Christina. A big shout out to Kumo. A big shout out to Cassie. Let's go. A big shout out to Habby. A big shout out to Skylar. A big shout out to Sarah. You're welcome, my darling. Shout out to Hemi. Shout out to Effie. Shout out to Fear. Oh, a big shout out to C4 Setu. A big shout out to Fenja. A big shout out to Joshua. A big shout out to Paisley. A big shout out to Jazaya. A big shout out to Raider. A big shout out to Omogbo. A big shout out to Dottie. A big shout out to Adley. A big shout out to Lengu. Lovely names. Absolutely gorgeous. Pretty names. And they all have meaning, That's the best thing about it. You are beautiful. You need to keep doing it as you are. Thank you so much for that good comment. A big shout out to Aradia. Shout out to Frida. A big shout out to Jane Lee. A big shout out to Molly. A big shout out to Brayley. Shout out to Kaylee. A big shout out to Bella. A big shout out to April. Shout out to Zaza. Shout out to Lena. Shout out to Vincent. A big shout out to Nina. Shout out to Laurie. Shout out to Stefan. Shout out to Kara. Shout out to Cruz. Shout out to Arabella. Shout out to Grace. Shout out to Lania. Shout out to Dottie. Shout out to Susanna. A big shout out to Nemsat. Shout out to Jonathan. A big shout out to Faith. A big shout out to Rudy. Shout out to Emerson. Shout out to Sophia. Shout out to Sapphire. Yeah. I love you too. Slay queen and king. Let's go. A big shout out to Sonny. A big shout out to Jenny. A big shout out to Finley. A big shout out to Olivia. A big shout out to Elsa. Let's go. A big shout out to Angel. A big shout out to Lesedi. A big shout out to Anna. You're welcome. A big shout out to Suzaiza from South Korea. You're welcome, guy. Please like and subscribe. Thank you for joining. A big shout out to Easy. A big shout out to Sila. A big shout out to Sama. Shout out to Daddy. A big shout out to Ismi. A big shout out to Luna. I love your style. I love you too. Clock it. A big shout out to Amity. A big shout out to Amy. A big shout out to Jana. A big shout out to Bree. A big shout out to Noah. A big shout out to Ethan. Shout out to Preepy. Thank you so much. A big shout out to Petra. Pretty names. Like seriously? These names are gorgeous. A big shout out to Kelani. A big shout out to Dan Jim. A big shout out to Ara from Ethiopia. All the way from Ethiopia, all the way from South Korea. Nice to meet you guys. Come on in, like and subscribe. Thank you so much for joining. Nice to meet you. A big shout out to Lila. A big shout out to Fenza. A big shout out to Elena. A big shout out to Ebony. A big shout out to Gemma. A big shout out to Christine. All the way from South Korea, Diamond. Nice to meet you. Welcome. A big shout out to Awande from South Africa. All my South Africans friends. Nice to meet you all. Come on in, like and subscribe. A big shout out to Laya. A big shout out to Lara. A big shout out to Fire from Manchester to Sahura. We are in the same country. I'm here in the UK as well, but I don't live in Manchester. A big shout out to Nancy. A big shout out to Jack. A big shout out to Isabel. A big shout out to Pony. A big shout out to Betula. A big shout out to Naira. A big shout out to Poppy. Shout out to Mia from Zimbabwe. To Sahura. A big shout out to Damon. You're welcome, my darling. Please like and subscribe. Nice to meet you. All the way from Zimbabwe. All the way from Germany. Nice to meet you. Like and subscribe. A big shout out to these are lovely countries, you know, with their special and with their peculiarities. Yeah. A big shout out to Sasha from America. Thank you. Please like and subscribe. Nice to meet you. A big shout out to Jack, all the way from Manchester. Thank you so much. You're welcome. Singapore. Ashan from Singapore. Nice to meet you. A big shout out to Gabriel, Germany. Nice to meet you. Let's go. Please, let's clock in, like and subscribe. Thank you so much. A big shout out to Luna from England. We are here together. A big shout out to Sophia. You are all welcome. Nice to meet you all. Everyone, nice to meet you. It's a pleasure, okay? Thank you so much. A big shout out to Abel. A big shout out to Lucy. A big shout out to Timothy from USA. A big shout out to Aya. A big shout out to Leila. A big shout out to Alan. A big shout out to Hadley. A big shout out to Olivia. A big shout out to Daniela. A big shout out to Indy from England. Wow. A big shout out to Andy. A big shout out to Emiri. A big shout out to Barbara. Thank you, guys. A big shout out to Tara, all the way from Philippines. Nice to meet you. A big shout out to Jovi. A big shout out to Enzo, America. A big shout out to Zaina from Palestine. Nice to meet you. A big shout out to Isabella. A big shout out to Fortnite. A big shout out to Andrew. A big shout out to Lucky. A big shout out to... Oh my God. Someone just said something funny, so I don't just want to laugh. A big shout out to Billy. A big shout out to Ward. A big shout out to Stephanie. Oh my God, from Canada. A big shout out to Lexi. A big shout out to Jovi, Singapore. You're welcome. Rayan, Canadian. Do. Nice to meet you. Shout out to Kali. A big shout out to Dalila. A big shout out to Evelyn. A big shout out to Amelia. Shout out to Rachel. Shout out to Kali. Shout out to Daggy. Shout out to Oscar. Shout out to Zalama. A big shout out to Blake. Shout out to Grace. A big shout out to Brandon. Shout out to Desnot. Shout out to Treasure. A big shout out to Emmy. Shout out to Dylan. Shout out to Brandon. Shout out to Alisa. Shout out to Brooklyn. A big shout out to Antigoni. A big shout out to Samira. A big shout out to Anna from Slovenia. Slovenia. Nice to meet you. A big shout out to Renee. A big shout out to Mike. A big shout out to Lena. A big shout out to Mara. A big shout out to LJ. A big shout out to Mike Ox. A big shout out to Naomi. A big shout out to Zahina. Guys, please let's go like and subscribe. Thank you so much. Can we take the like up to 170, please, for me? Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Please take the like up to 170 and don't forget to like and subscribe. Okay, let's subscribe. Let's go, besties. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. A big shout out to Onksim. Ooksim. A big shout out to Alessi. A big shout out to Mia. Shout out to Max. Shout out to Ellie. Shout out to Paul Reynox. Shout out to Chalu. Shout out to Alexi. Shout out to Kandusaga Hegja Hater Bente. Wow. A big shout out to Koheti. A big shout out to Sabrina. A big shout out to Kate. A big shout out to Anastasia. Damn. Everybody say damn. Is damn, baby. I be the talker. A big shout out to Mike. A big shout out to Dang. A big shout out to Violet. A big shout out to Maverick. A big shout out to Alexis. A big shout out to Lala. Shout out to Lexi. Shout out to Laya. A big shout out to Devon. A big shout out to Maeve. A big shout out to Alexander. Shout out to Gracie. A big shout out to Livy. A big shout out to V. A big shout out to Evelyn. A big shout out to Maverick. A big shout out to E. Morgan. A big shout out to Lula and your lovely puppy doggy. A big shout out to Mia. A big shout out to Lexi. Guys, let's take the like up to 180, please. Yeah, let's go, go. A big shout out to Gion. A big shout out to Keith. A big shout out to You're welcome. A big shout out to Exinja. Hi, darling. A big shout out to Philip. A big shout out to Max. A big shout out to Kata. A big shout out to Saffron. A big shout out to Oakley. A big shout out to Jesse. A big shout out to Eman. Guys, let's go like and subscribe. Thank you so much. Yeah, let's take the like up to 90, please. Thank you for spamming. I do really appreciate. Thank you for spamming. Thank you for liking. Thank you for hearting me. I really do appreciate, okay? Don't say I'm not talking about it. I'm saying it, and my heart is really, really happy about it. And I'm happy, highly appreciate. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, a big shout out to Ethan, a big shout out to Durel, a big shout out to Orion, a big shout out to Rema, a big shout out to Alicia, a big shout out to Stefan, a big shout out to Gigi, a big shout out to E. Morgan, a big shout out to Massey, a big shout out to Aubrey, a big shout out to Sophia Hong. Yeah. A big shout out to Sadie. Thanks for subscribing. Thank you for liking. A big shout out to Goss. A big shout out to Natalie. Shout out to Oram. Shout out to Destiny. A big shout out to Christopher. Guys, can we take the like up to 200, my dad? Can we take the like up? Please, let's go. A big shout out to Amelia. A big shout out to Sarah. A big shout out to Asa. A big shout out to Sebastian. Pride Alpha. Shout out to Jackson. A big shout out to Jack. A big shout out to Darcy. A big shout out to Kai. A big shout out to Kavaya. A big shout out to Safra. Clock it! A big shout out to Keisha. A big shout out to Miku from Ethiopia. Please, guys, don't forget to tell your friends to like and subscribe. Bring them in. Let them come, come subscribe. Tell your friends in Ethiopia, America, anywhere. Yeah, just invite them to subscribe as well, so that I can give them a shout out. How we do it. A big shout out to Bednin. A big shout out to Tenzi Musel. A big shout out to Masha.
Let me be your life coach.
A big shout out to Lila. A big shout out to Marisa. A big shout out to Milika. A big shout out to Daddy. A big shout out to Faith. A big shout out to Kiana. A big shout out to Shun Sank Dawa. Nice to meet you. Powerful name. A big shout out to Prisia. A big shout out to Lindia. A big shout out to Africa. A big shout out to Penny. A big shout out to Ima. A big shout out to Gemma. A big shout out to Kiana. A big shout out to Ashley. A big shout out to Sapphire. A big shout out to Priya. Shout out to Alega. A big shout out to OVJXJGXJGC. A big shout out to Sam. A big shout out to Yumili. A big shout out to Vasilisa. A big shout out to Mika. A big shout out to Kenzie. A big shout out to Saffron. A big shout out to Alega. A big shout out to Kenley. A big shout out to... Welcome back, my darling wellness. Clock it. Thank you so much. 200 likes. Here we are. Thank you, my amazing friends. I love you all. You can see. I can see. I can see. Thank you, my amazing friends. Thank you so much. I love you all, you know. Yeah, please let's go like and subscribe. Thank you so much. A big shout out to Kayana. A big shout out to Dunja. A big shout out to Beatrice. Clark Kids, I miss you. A big shout out to Vanessa. A big shout out to Princess. A big shout out to Maria. A big shout out to Spencer. A big shout out to Ariana. Shout out to Talula. Shout out to Terin Doma. I love you. I love you. You love my hair. Oh, thank you so much. Oh, you're welcome. A big shout out to Kamsi. A big shout out to Rayleigh. A big shout out to Lily. A big shout out to Hannah. A big shout out to Sungman. That's not nice. A big shout out to Ashley. A big shout out to Jamsley. Please don't write that again. That's not nice. I can't say that, you know. You like my sweater? You have a lot of heart on it. You can see. Have a lot of heart on the sweater. So I love it as well. So you guys gave me a lot of hearts this morning. So I got them on my shirt, on my jumper. Okay? Thank you so much. Your voice is cute. Thank you, my darling. Let's go. A big shout out to Glory. A big shout out to Hannah. A big shout out to Hannah. Yeah. 200 likes. You guys are gorgeous. Like, you all are sweet. Thank you so much. Let me clap for everyone. Yeah, I'm clapping for you. Thanks for your cooperation. Thanks for your support. Thanks for the likes. Yeah. A big shout out to Omi. A big shout out to Luca. A big shout out to Queen Maria Vista. A big shout out to Makayla. A big shout out to Tenzi Top Dean. You love my hair. Thank you so much. A big shout out to Sophia. A big shout out to Deline. Let's go. A big shout out to Kat. Let's go. A big shout out to Ababio. Nice face. Thank you so much. A big shout out to Shane. A big shout out to Brina. A big shout out to Kat. A big shout out to London. A big shout out to Nation. Let's go. A big shout out to Queen Mary. A big shout out to Bella. A big shout out to Grace Maurice. A big shout out to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Max. A big shout out to Savannah. A big shout out to Avery. Shout out to Mary. Shout out to Chanel. Shout out to Royin. Welcome back, darling. Shout out to Baba. Shout out to Bada, yeah. A big shout out to Day Jones. A big shout out to Emily. A big shout out to Ben. Girl, I'm your biggest fan. Oh, clock it. Besties for life. Thank you so much. I know. Absolutely, I know. Thank you so much. Guys, please always drop. I also post videos. Yeah, but like 4 days back I haven't posted my content. Yeah, it's a bit, it's like intentional. I have a lot of content. I do fashion acts and some other, stuff. So please, let's go to my channel, like, drop your comment, your lovely comment. Well done, girl, keep pushing. Those are the comments that keep me going and give me this inner strength. You know what it is? Okay, it gives me this inner strength, gives me joy to want to do more, My slay kings, my slay queen, I love you all. Please, let's drop a comment on me, or on my videos, I mean. Drop a comment on my videos, like, come to my live stream. Let's make it a beautiful day, okay? A big shout out to Barbara. I love you so much. I love you too, my darling. You slay, my diva. You all slay. And your names are gorgeous, including the long name, the long name, I mean. Including the long names. Yeah, they're gorgeous. A big shout out to Emily. A big shout out to Montio. A big shout out to Hardin. A big shout out to Red. A big shout out to Aliana. A big shout out to Retty Boy. A big shout out to Oshana. A big shout out to Nova. Sorry, guys. I need to change. I need to change. I'm sorry, guys. Just hang on a minute. Okay, it's done. This sky view. Yeah, I can see the sky from my room. So it's a lovely view. A big shout out to, I'm your biggest fan. Thank you, Trisha. Yay. I trust you, my darling. A big shout out to Gurpreet. A big shout out to Kale. A big shout out to Zeddy. A big shout out to Michelle. Shout out to Desi. A big shout out to Mara. A big shout out to Heavy. A big shout out to Camila. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm seeing your comments and I do appreciate. Yeah, thank you very much. A big shout out to Isla. A big shout out to Mark. A big shout out to Savannah. A big shout out. Please, can we take the like up to 225 for me? Please. Yeah, please, can you take the like up to 225? And Please let's subscribe. Thank you so much. I love you all. Let's go, guys. A big shout out to Omi 225, guys. Thank you. And if you can pass that, number, please pass. As in just like. If you haven't liked, please come in and like and subscribe. Thank you. So if you've done that, drop your names now. Let's give you a shout out. Drop your names. I followed you. Thank you, my darling. Thank you for following. Drop your name. Drop your name. Okay. A big shout out to Suki. A big shout out to Samragi. A big shout out to Mantabo. A big shout out to Nicola. A big shout out to Mila. A big shout out to Jocelyn. A big shout out to Brooke. A big shout out to I like because I like it. Thank you. A big shout out to Daisy and Cash. A big shout out to Massey. Shout out to Victoria. Shout out to Leilani. Shout out to Suleiman. A big shout out to Lila. A big shout out to Etan. A big shout out to Bongi Bongi. A big shout out to Lucy. Let's go. A big shout out to Zarich. A big shout out to Peel. A big shout out to Ellie, Kate, and Lucy. A big shout out to Fatima. I'm your biggest fan. Thank you so much, my darling. I know. Thank you for your support. Guys, can we take the like up to 230 for me, please? A big shout out to Florence. A big shout out to Jet. A big shout out to Retty. A big shout out to Yard. A big shout out to Tama. A big shout out to Tanisha. A big shout out to Skylar. A big shout out to your look or a big shout out to Joseph. That's not your name. The person writes you look ugly. So the person wrote it like a name. Yeah, so it sounds like that. You look ugly. So I won't read that. A big shout out to Natasha. A big shout out to Araya. A big shout out to Shakina. A big shout out to Vicky. A big shout out to Jelly. A big shout out to Ka. A big shout out to Unka. A big shout out to Unkosana. Nice to meet you guys. Please let's go like and sub. Can we take the like up to 230 for me, please? Thank you. A big shout out to Delhi. A big shout out to Madi. A big shout out to Edna. A big shout out to Uminati. A big shout out to Annabelle. A big shout out to Chloe. A big shout out to Trisha. A big shout out to Aubrey. A big shout out to Jocelyn. A big shout out to Reagan. A big shout out to Kalkida. Let's go. A big shout out to Terry Kusa Hazi. A big shout out to Jess. A big shout out to Mandeline. A big shout out to Juliana. A big shout out to Lauren. A big shout out to Laura. A big shout out to Nia. A big shout out to Lottie. A big shout out to Iyana. Guys, let's go like and subscribe. Thank you so much. A big shout out to Tanara. A big shout out to Gigi. A big shout out to Humi. A big shout out to Etienne. A big shout out to Makayla. A big shout out to Rodi. A big shout out to Juliana. A big shout out to Akina. Let's go. No worries about your names. I know your names have good meanings. It might be a bit difficult to pronounce, but never mind. Okay, we understand. A big shout out to Vivian. A big shout out to Janet. A big shout out to Cora. A big shout out to Vivian. A big shout out to Finley. A big shout out to Kathleen. A big shout out to Finley. Thank you so much, my lovely. A big shout out to Finboy. A big shout out to Brian. A big shout out to Regan. Guys, if you have any question, can you please wait to the end of this live stream? To the end of this live. I'll give you 10 to 5 minutes to ask your question almost at the end of the live. Please, if you have anything to say, can you please be patient till almost the end of the live? When it's time for question and answer, I will let you know. Thank you for your understanding. God bless you. A big shout out to Rona. A big shout out to Laya. A big shout out to Kiki. A big shout out to Finn. A big shout out to Rona. A big shout out to Humi. A big shout out to Amelia. Shout out to Rita. Shout out to Finboy. A big shout out to Gail. Let's go. Please drop your name. A big shout out to Sad. I'm fine, guys. Thank you so much. A big shout out to Emily. A big shout out to Tanara. A big shout out to Hapa. A big shout out to Femboy. A big shout out to Laya. A big shout out to Vivian. A big shout out to Kami. A big shout out to Yo Very. A big shout out to Alexander. A big shout out to Mariam. A big shout out to Megan. A big shout out to Nosa. A big shout out to Joyceley. A big shout out to Lily. A big shout out to Emily. A big shout out to Frida. Shout out to Michaela. Shout out to Hapa. Shout out to Athena. Shout out to Frida. I love your video, Kiki. Thank you, my darling, for loving my video. A big shout out to Layali. A big shout out to Michaela Reddy. A big shout out to Paige. A big shout out to George. A big shout out to Chantel. Be your biggest fan. Thank you, my darling. Big shout out to Mallory. A big shout out to Wilson. I love you. You're so kind. Thank you, my darling. A big shout out to Abia. I subscribe to you. Thank you so much. Someone just said you are so ugly. Thank you so much. But you're cute. Why I look ugly? I wish you all the best. A big shout out to Sponge Hammer. I'm such a big fan. Thank you, my darling. I know. Thank you, guys. A big shout out to Hayden. What are you doing? What does it look like I'm doing? A big shout out to Ethan. A big shout out to Hayden. You're not ugly. Don't listen to them. I know. That's why I just laughed. I know. A big shout out to Rihanna. A big shout out to Abigail. You're beautiful. I subscribe. Thank you so much. Happy birthday. Thank you. A big shout out to she Bim. Ah, a big shout out to Roasted. Did I just say that? Oh my days. Please don't put that because I'll just say it. And I will take note until I've said it. Yeah, no one is ugly. Everyone is beautiful. Yeah, we are God's made. So it's one of those things. A big shout out to Charlotte. God loves you too, my darling. A big shout out to Gali. A big shout out to Zaya. A big shout out to Esther. Guys, can we take the like up to 250? 250. I am ugly. My cousin says that. Ah, come on, you're not. You're not. Even with your name. You know, pretty. If you have a pretty name, you're pretty. So your name is so beautiful. So you should be beautiful. Don't listen to your cousin. I think he's pulling your legs. Guys, can we take the like up to 150? Let's go. Let's go, guys. Let's go, 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 go. Let's go, 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 go. Let's go. 150. And don't forget to subscribe. A big shout out to Dida, yeah. A big shout out to Christine. A big shout out to Amelia. A big shout out to Haley. A big shout out to Ruben. A big shout out to Freya. I dare you to sing Let It Go. Like, do I tell you I know how to sing? So you don't need to dare me. A big shout out to Freya. My country is sorry, I don't want to read that here. That's political crickum crackum. This is just a channel to give a shout out. So anything you're having in your country concerning who is doing who, please, not for this channel. This channel is to give a shout out, please. I'm sorry. A big shout out to Rose Bet. A big shout out to Sophia. A big shout out to Kaylee. A big shout out to Brandon. A big shout out to Jace. A big shout out to Claire B. Tena. A big shout out to Alana. Oh, thank you. Have a lovely day, my darling. I will miss you. A big shout out to Reco. Anyways, I'll be back here in the evening, so we might see, we might not. A big shout out to your lovely daughter, Lala. My regards to her, mommy. A big shout out to Maura. A big shout out to Charlie. A big shout out to Random. Oh, do I have a daughter named Lala? No, I don't have a daughter. No. A big shout out to Luna Ray. A big shout out to JC. Probably I'm looking like someone's parent. I'm looking like someone's mom. Your daughter will be like, oh, is that not Lala's mom? This is Lala's mom. No, I'm not Lala's mom. A big shout out to Luna. A big shout out to Pesley. A big shout out to James. James, I'm good. Thank you so much. My name is Essay. You can call me Kiki. That's my channel's name. Hi, Edda Fred. Hope you're good. A big shout out to Kaza. A big shout out to Emily. A big shout out to, can you? Yeah, I'm watching you. A big shout out to Fenja. Guys, now you can drop your questions. You can drop your questions now. If you have any questions for me, you can drop your questions. And please, if you can be quick about it, if you can be fast about it, that would be kind. Okay, please drop your questions very fast so that I can carry on with my shout out. Can you play my music? What's your music, please? A big shout out to Catalina. A big shout out to Sophie. A big shout out to Robin. A big shout out to Veronica. A big shout out to Wande, all the way from South Africa. Please, I'm watching you on live. Please shout out. A big shout out to Brianna. Okay, I don't think there's questions because I don't think there's any question for me. Let me carry on with the shout out, okay? A big shout out to Ellie. A big shout out to Camila. Can you play my music? What music? A big shout out to Lini. My mom is from Africa. Where in Africa? Africa is very big. It's a big continent. So where? Okay. Who did your hair? Okay. This one. Yeah, I did my hair myself. It was made. Yeah, did it myself. But I couldn't record much because my phone storage was full, so I couldn't. Yeah, I was not happy about it at all. I would have posted it for you to see that. Yeah, I did it myself. A big shout out to Lana. A big shout out to Maria. A big shout out to Kaylee. A big shout out to JC. A big shout out to CC Heg Age. A big shout out to Adrena. Dancing Alone, it's my music. Oh, that's good, but I don't know it. My music is This Girl Is on Fire. This girl is on fire. This girl is on fire. She walking on fire. A big shout out to Angel. I love this song as well. A big shout out to ABBA. I love that song. A big shout out to Caroline. A big shout out to Lana. Shout out to Selena. Shout out to I Do Remember You, Maya. Pretty. A big shout out to Brianna. A big shout out to Selena. A big shout out to Millie. A big shout out to Brody. Let's go. Guys, are you ready to eat with me? Yeah. I've not had breakfast, and this is 1, and this is 3:15 past 3 in the afternoon. A big shout out to Natzia. A big shout out to Noah. Okay, I will. Thank you. A big shout out to Zoe. You're welcome, my darling. A big shout out to Asel. A big shout out to Jeffrey Astin. Guys, please, let's take the like up to 270. Let's go. Let's go. A big shout out to Lara. A big shout out to Kensin. A big shout out to Yahoo. A big shout out to Hoon. Guys, let's go. A big shout out to Soul. A big shout out to Alban. A big shout out to Ray. A big shout out to Shania. A big shout out to Valentina. A big shout out to Brian. A big shout out to Margaret. A big shout out to Lene. A big shout out to Valentina. Big shout out to Joy. Shout out to Brianna. Shout out to Tempest. Shout out to Liana. You're welcome. Shout out to Malik. Shout out to Bobby Jane. Bobby Jan. Shout out to Erica. I mean, a big shout out to Luna. Okay, please like and subscribe. Bless you. Shout out to Mary Marshall. Big shout out to Shaniha. Shaniha. A big shout out to Dayon. Shout out to Amina. Shout out to Derek. Shout out to Hafsat. Shout out to Kathleen. A big shout out to Nahida. Shout out to Amelia. Shout out to Amina. Guys, let's go like and subscribe. Thank you so much. Yeah. Please like and subscribe. You will give me like do you want me to go eat end the life, or do you want me to come while I'm eating? So I need your response. Do you want me to end the life while I go eat my breakfast, or do you want me to eat, or do you want me to eat on this life? Yeah, just choose one. Okay, you guys say no, I shouldn't end the life. Somebody say eat on this life, okay? Do you want me to eat on the life? But I won't give you a shout out because I won't choke myself. I won't go and choke myself and start calling ambulance. Eat with us, okay? Somebody say eat with us. Someone say stay with us, girl, okay? But I won't say anything because I'm eating. I won't be giving you a shout out, my darlings. So if you want me to stay on this live eating, yeah, I won't. I won't talk. But I might come back in 30 minutes. If you want me to eat like 30 minutes, I'll be back. Eat with us, okay? I'll just eat for 30 minutes and I'll be back. I don't think 30 minutes is too much. It's too long. Ryu. It sound you. Ryu. Yeah, 30 minutes is not long. Is it? Yeah, just for 30 minutes. I'll just eat 30 minutes and I'm back. I don't think 30 minutes is long. Okay. People want to see me train my mouth. Chewing my mouth like me that don't have table manners. I don't have table manners. You want to see me and see the way I'm chewing like rabbits. Anyways, let me go, guys. Let me go for 30 minutes and I will be back. Hi, you are beautiful and good. Thank you. Kai, remember me, Pro Medi. I remember you, Pro Medi, Sam Medi. Guys, so you're so beautiful. Thank you so much. So let me go chew my mouth behind the camera because I don't think I have table manners. When I'm here with you and I start chewing my mouth, you'll be like, ew, why are you eating like that? So let me hide my secrets. So let me hide myself, guys. I'll be back. Just 30 minutes. Okay. Are you happy, guys? Are you happy? Girl, you are too funny. We have to be. We have to be funny, you know. Yeah, we shouldn't take things too much, too high, you know, too serious. Yeah, the life is just too small to be too serious about life. I have a basketball game. Oh, in 30 minutes. All right. We'll always see. If not today, someday, because I stream every day, literally every day. So we'll always see. Okay. Craft and build. Okay, guys, let me go now. Thank you for your time. I want to leave, but I'll be back very soon. I'll come back. I will come back after you eat. Okay. Okay, my darling. Love you, my princess. Love you, queen. Thank you. Bye. Thank you for your permission to go. Blah, 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 blah. I love you. I am new. Oh, you are new and I'm leaving now to go eat. Okay, okay. Do you know what? Yeah, just subscribe, okay? Like, turn on your notification bell so that when I come, I'll give you a shout out, okay? Oh, I'm just, yeah, I want to go have something to eat so that you can be seeing my face every day and I can shout. Shout out to Luna, shout out to Paisley, shout out to Joy, shout out to Meg, shout out to Michael, shout out to shout out. So if I did not eat, how will I do it? All right, guys, bye.